Welcome to Rooster AM. This is Ryan Nelson. Today is not just another episode. Today we welcome a true icon, a man whose voice has narrated and shaped generations, whose soul is always led with courage and compassion. He's spoken truth with power. He's brought to life some of the most unforgettable characters in cinematic history, from President Josiah Bartlet on The West Wing to Captain Willard in Apocalypse Now. But beyond the screen, he is a man with a heart, a big heart, a storyteller, a father. He's a man of grace. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an absolute honor and a privilege to welcome the legendary Mr. Martin Sheen. Martin, how are you doing?
Well, I'm a little humbled by your introduction. I so appreciate it. As you were saying those superlatives, I wondered who's he talking about. I'm delighted to join you.
Well, I'm so glad that you're here, and a lot of people might be asking how in the world we met, and I've got to keep it kind of secretive. Producers have told me. But we met on an Oklahoma set. He was shooting a movie here in Oklahoma. And do you recall our meeting?
Well, as I recall, we were shooting in a coffee shop downtown near the center of the town, and we started talking about acting and about Shakespeare, I believe, and you were telling me that you had actually played in a Shakespeare production of Romeo and Juliet. You were a master sword fighter in stage combat, that is, and that you did a run of Romeo and Juliet, and I couldn't believe it. And then you showed me on your cell phone the battle scene, which was extraordinary. I'd never seen anything done in a stage play with a sword and dagger that was so clearly dangerous and exciting and thoroughly, professionally, brilliantly done. And I was flabbergasted and became an immediate admirer. So am I in the right? Is that the description of how we met?
Well, that's what you remember. Here's what I remember.
No.
I remember doing this. I didn't know what I was doing because they just basically, my son was asked to be a part. And by the way, he says hi.
Oh, please remember me to him. He's a very dear young man.
Yeah. Well, I was there for him, and they asked me if I could help. So I said, sure, I'll help out. And then I'm standing there. I didn't know really what I was doing. And then all of a sudden, you kind of walk in, and they're like, well, here's Martin Sheen. Get out of the way, Ryan. You know, I should win an Oscar for best stand-in. But I just kind of walked and sat down, and I remember the words that came out of my mouth. It was not very, becoming of me. It was holy poop. That's Martin Sheen. But I used another word. But we're PG. And then I sat down, and then you came over and sat close. We were like at a booth, and I think, you asked me a question. I think you said, "Are you from Ian, or you from here?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then we just started talking. And the part that really stood out to me was because I had nothing to lose being in this set. Like, I wasn't getting paid, nothing. So, and I remember them saying that pictures weren't really something we were supposed to do. And I leaned forward and I just said, would it be uncool if I asked for a picture? And I remember your words. You said, it would be uncool if we didn't.
Right.
And I was
I think I also said it may be the only thing I achieved today.
Yeah. But I was like, that was the coolest thing ever. Because I've met a lot of people that are, famous or celebrities. And you made me feel so comfortable within 5 minutes. I kind of forgot who you were. It was just like, this is just a cool dude. And and then the next day they were like, yeah, you've been requested. You're now the official stand-in. And I was like,
okay.
Awesome.
Yeah. I think, they always try to be protective. I think one of the reasons they might not want us to say it is because they may change the title of the film before it opens. and have a selected campaign. But there's no denying we were there. We did press coverage. We did interviews. Everyone knew we were in Enid. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Yeah, you are. Yeah. How'd you like the town?
Well,
Other than the freezing cold.
It was so flat. I remember the first morning I went out, it was so cold, the wind was so strong, people were walking backwards.
Yeah. I remember you walking in and you said, "I'm done for the day."
Yeah, I'm done. Yeah.
Oh, it was great.
I'm not going back outside again. No, it was, the wind was what was so, cold and powerful, and the people were so sweet, and I remember I was trying to take the shortcuts to get back to the hotel on my first walk around town, and I would cross the street against the lights, and the people would just stop, and no one would beep the horn or shout at me for jaywalking. But I remember everybody, the people in the hotel, the people in the town, the people on the set, all of the people involved with the production were just terrific. And I'd never been in that part of Oklahoma before. I'd been in Oklahoma City years past, but I'd never worked in Oklahoma that I could remember. Oh, no, I was there many years ago. I did a biography of Pretty Boy Floyd, Arthur Floyd, the infamous hold-up artist from the Cookson Hills of Oklahoma. And we went out there after we finished. I think we did the film here in Hollywood in 1973 or 4. And afterwards, we went out to Oklahoma to interview Floyd's family. His mother was still living at that time. And the director and writer of the show, Clyde Ware, an old and dear friend who's passed away since then, God rest him. But he was this very, creative guy who loved history. And he thought if there was any chance of getting any of Pretty Boy Floyd's relatives on camera, he would do so. So we went out there and we did it, and we photographed his gravesite, and one of the other of his siblings were there. But I remember interviewing his mother in the home where he grew up, and so that was really the first and only time that I'd filmed in Oklahoma since we went to Enid to do.
That's so cool, because like a lot of people don't. I mean, Enid, other than the week you were here, I'm not kidding, is listed as one of the most desirable places to live in Enid or in Oklahoma, but it's also one of the most affordable places to live.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was just, and so it's just really cool that movies are starting to happen in this area. I do think it's fun though. So my son, when you came and you ate with him, so we went out, or he went to school, and some of the kids were kind of flexing about, people they had met before. And, these are like kind of, local celebrity kind of things. And then Junior goes, "Well, I got to eat with Martin Sheen." and you know how he is. He wasn't bragging. He was just like, and they were like, "What?" And he was like, "Yeah." And
well, I know what they said. They said, "Who's Martin Sheen?"
That's what some of the kids did say. And it's funny because then they Googled it, and this is what I was getting to. It's so wild. Like my mom and dad, they know you because you're West Wing. You're the president to them. Same thing with my grandparents. And then people I went to college with, they remember you because of Badlands, those early movies. And then like in the military, Apocalypse Now. So you kind of cover the same. But you know what the kids think today? You know what they think? You probably, when they Googled your name and they lost their minds. They were like, "Oh my gosh, it's Uncle Ben from Spider-Man."
Yeah, I was at a graduation ceremony a couple of years ago, and they were giving my credits, and that was the only one that got a reaction from the graduates. Uncle Ben.
I thought that was so funny. I'm like, out of all the things he has done, this young generation needs to start. They need to stop watching movies and start watching films. Because,
well, I was lucky enough to be in some that a lot of folks still remember, but they were, they were some of the great directors. I worked with Francis Coppola, of course, on Apocalypse Now, but I worked with Terrence Malick, who incidentally is from Oklahoma, and I know he lives in Texas and spent most of his life in Texas, but Terrence Malick is from Oklahoma. And of course, Martin Scorsese, directed, The Departed, and I was fortunate enough to work with him. So those three directors alone, really, were some of the great, things that I had a part in, you know. And there were some others as well that, made some terrific movies that I was a part of. But those three in particular are memorable.
So if we rewound back to 1973, and if you're listening right now, that's before West Wing, before Apocalypse Now. There was this dusty landscape with a haunting score and a love story wrapped in quiet violence. That's the Badlands.
Oh my God! Okay, yeah, it was actually shot in '72. It was released in '74, but we shot it in 1972 in Colorado, a little community in Colorado. On the prairie. Yeah.
So with
La Junta, Colorado is where we filmed that. Yeah.
So with Terrence, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that was his first film.
That was, yeah. He'd done a student film. He was part of another organization, and he did a student film. But this was his first feature, and he wrote it and produced it ostensibly with his wife, and directed it. And in fact, he's in the film. A lot of people don't realize it, but we were shooting a scene at a location that we only had permission to do it one day, and the actor who was scheduled to do this one scene with me didn't make it. We never knew why, but he couldn't make it, and so Terry just filled in. And he said he always meant to reshoot it with another actor. And I said, that is the one scene that I will never reshoot. And in all the 50 plus years that I've known this man and adored him, we're still very close friends. But that is the only conflict we ever had. He insisted on reshooting that scene, and I said, no, I'm never going to do it. And he was furious with me. But I'm delighted that he's on film, and it's the scene he comes to the rich man's house. And he's got some mechanical drawings under his arm and a hat and a seersucker suit. And he's saying, Mr. Scarborough here? And I'm saying, well, no, the thing about him, he's sick, see. And he was so furious that I would not do the scene again. But as I say, I'm delighted that it's him, because you can rarely find any still photographs. He's an extremely shy, very protective of his privacy. Never does interviews, and you rarely see any pictures of him.
Wow. So he's a very humble man.
Extremely humble, yeah.
Humble and talented, because he is, like, his name is spoken with reverence in the film community. It's wild that you got to do that with him, and when you watch that, I guess the thing that really stuck, I mean, there's a lot that sticks out, but at the very beginning, your very first line, do you remember what that was?
The dead dog.
I'll give you $1. You eat that collie.
Yeah, give you $1 to eat that collie, and then you see before that, Holly. She's on the bed playing with the dog, and then you're talking about eating this dog.
And I was like,
what an image, like, he portrays. Like, right off the bat, you see her innocence on the bed. You see Kit's darkness in this dog. And then if you notice, when she gets in trouble for singing and her dad shoots the dog, she now turns into Kit.
Yeah, she gets furious with her father.
Yeah. I'm not spoiling anything, guys. If you haven't seen it, okay, go watch it.
It's considered a classic. In fact, it's on the 100 best movies in the Library of Congress, along with Apocalypse Now.
50 years later, what do you think about Kit in your memory?
Well, we were watching it not too long ago. It was on TCM, and we started watching it, and it is really I mean, it's an extraordinary film, and you think how long ago it was made. It was so imaginative, and it's so, the theme is so couched in reverence, in a sense. It's like he invented a way of doing films in a very individual, personalized way. He gave an image of what that criminal mind had about himself and the country at the time, you know. It was about image. It was not about reality. You know, he had to build a monument at the place where they caught him. He gave out souvenirs after he was apprehended. He talked about, you know, people leaving trash on the street, you know, that was, you know, and then he gave advice, you know, he made those speeches, about, you know, listen to the majority opinion, try to get along, you know, and along the way he killed about 11 people, but he's given advice to young people about how to be good citizens, you know. It was the image. And I remember Terry talking about how he used the gun. It was like he never really pointed it at anyone until he used it. And he said to Kit, it was like a magic wand, that it solved all the problems. It removed the obstacle in his way. And they had it coming, you know. It was always a fair fight in his mind, you know. Like the guys that came to get him in the wilderness, well, they were just there for the reward money, you know. They weren't law enforcement officers, so they didn't deserve a fair fight, you know. He shot him from behind. I mean, it was the image of this lunatic, and it reflected a lot of the things we see in our, you know, criminal minds these days that are couched in that singular purpose of, I know what's best, I know what's going on, this is the truth of what's happening now, and I'm going to project that truth, you know. It's like a huge sophomoric ego. So
he was likable.
Oh yeah, you know, I said to Janet, I remember watching, and I said, you know, if I hadn't killed all those people, that film would have made me a romantic, you know. I would have been thought of as a young leading romantic figure, you know.
It's like a love story, but at the same time, you're like rooting for him, but you're not. You're like, I can't root for this guy because he's ruthless, but at the same time, I kind of like him, and he's got this James Dean quality, you know.
Oh yeah. You know, James Dean had this incredible image and power on us as youngsters, myself included, you know. I mean, there was nobody, with the possible exception of Elvis, you know, during the 50s that had such a powerful influence on all us young people. And not just girls, but boys as well. I mean, those were two figures that we were equally impressed by and motivated by and wanted to be like. And it was James Dean and Elvis Presley, you know, and they came almost simultaneously. Yeah. In fact, Elvis loved James Dean, and he really wanted to be a good film actor. He wanted to study, but the Colonel had other ideas, you know. He wanted a star. He didn't want an actor, you know. Yeah. So Elvis never developed his talent. And I remember him complaining once about his movies were like travel documentaries, you know. They weren't personal, and he was just used for his face and his talent, but not for his inner emotional life, which he never really got to develop. So, but Dean did, even at such a young age. Dean had really transcended acting to behavior, you know. It was like you couldn't believe this guy was acting. It was happening right in front of you. And so all of us, I wanted to be an actor since I was a young child. So, you know, seeing this phenomenon, and I was 15 when he died, and I never saw one of his movies until after he was gone, which was East of Eden. You know, he had just died in September of '55. So that was the first time I saw him. And then he had two films in the can, which came out later. But, I mean, the influence he had on us, all of us, boys and girls, young people, it was just phenomenal. It still is in a lot of ways.
Well, I won't forget when we're on the set and we're messing around talking about movies, and you show me the James Dean, and you tripped over that cord, it was as though the president got shot.
Like 100 people come running around, and I was like, I was hiding because I was like, it's kind of my fault.
Talking about the time I was coming back on the set and I tripped over a cord in the park and fell flat on my face. Yeah.
Yeah, I did my best to run over and get you up before anyone saw it, but it was too late. It was literally President Bartlett got shot.
Boy, that was a strange feeling because there's nothing to stop you. You know, he's like, your your face is where your feet should be, and it just didn't seem natural. You know,
And guys,
it was cold. It was so cold, and the ground was like frozen. It was like, oh my gosh. But he was doing the James Dean walk, with the hand out. And I was like, oh, that's a memory I'll always remember. But let's jump out of Badlands, go to South Dakota to the jungles, or out of South Dakota to the jungles of Vietnam. Everybody knows this one. This is the Apocalypse Now. This was the first film of yours that I actually watched and walked away going, okay, that is one of the most beautiful movies I've ever seen. But at the same time, I don't know if I actually want to watch it again. But because it's so emotionally, from a military standpoint, how was it to play that physically and emotionally?
Well, you make films in increments. That film in particular took about a year and a half to film at 3 different episodes for me in the Philippines. Where we'd start and we got knocked out by a typhoon, and we came home to regroup, and they rebuilt the sets, and we went back and filmed for another few months, and then came back for a Christmas break, and then went back again for the final phase. So all in all, I was on it for almost a year and 4 months or so, actual filming, and then through 2 years of editing, I did nearly, I would say, a dozen full narrations, trying to find the right tone for the narration of the film. And that took another 2 years. So the film was in production for, I guess 3 or 4 years from pre-production to filming, then editing and post-production. So it finally opened in, I believe, the fall of 1979. And so it was a huge part of my life. It was all consuming, and for most of the time we had our children there with us. So it was a family affair, as we usually tried to make our distant locations, tried to keep the kids with us as much as possible when we were on location. And that was no exception. But they didn't stay the whole time. They came and went at different times when they had time off from school. But it was a very trying time. And it was one of those times when if somebody had told me going in that this is what lay ahead, I would have, I would have passed. In fact.
Oh, you had a heart attack, didn't you?
Well, I'm not sure. Years later, it was determined I was having a physical for another film, and they said, we heard you had a heart attack, but we don't see it. So, yeah, it's kind of it was exhaustion. It was probably as much of a reaction, physical reaction, a breakdown, emotional, physical, spiritual. Psychological. It was, I was, you were in the service, I was 36 when I started filming. I wouldn't have been in combat that age unless I was at least a lieutenant, a captain, a colonel, who knows what, we're, a career officer. Yeah. And, so I was not in the best of shape, just beginning with age. And most of those guys on the boat were kids, Freddie Forrest, Freddie was like, maybe he was 30 or so. I don't know how. I think. Well, of course, Fishburne, Larry Fishburne, was 14.
Or
Was it Lawrence?
Lawrence, well, they call him Lawrence now. Yeah, I knew him as Larry, and
Larry.
I adore him. Yeah,
okay.
he's one of the great actors of any.
Oh, he's great. Shakes. He's really good. I loved him in. I think it was Othello.
Yeah, he's magnificent, and he. Many years later, my son Emilio and I were writing a father-son memoir called Along the Way. And in the book, I didn't know, we wrote it separately. He wrote his ideas and I wrote mine. And when I read his version, his ideas of what was happening in our relationship as a child and as a young adult and his fellow actors, he revealed in the book that Lawrence Fishburne had saved his life when we were filming Apocalypse Now in the Philippines. I'd never heard this. Evidently, they'd taken out a boat on this volcanic lake up in the this high area above Paksanhan, where we did most of the filming on the river. And they were out boating one day, and the boat got stuck in the mud, and Emilio hopped overboard and tried to push it out, and he began to sink in this very, very powerful suction of the mud and water, and he was going underwater, and he was drowning. And Lawrence Fishburne reached over and pulled him out and saved his life. And neither one of them ever mentioned a word of that to us. So I immediately sent him a notice and tried to reach him and thank him for that. And then I said to Emilio, you got some explaining to do. When did all this happen? Why didn't you tell us, Well, he didn't want to tell us because he shouldn't have been out there in the first place,
That's exactly why. I was sitting there thinking he was 14, wasn't he? So
yeah, so they're still great friends, and we're deeply we think of Lawrence Fishburne with deep gratitude and respect and love, but also with a parental knowledge that he saved our son's life. So it goes beyond that. Nothing is more important than that.
There's two. Well, actually, in that film, there's two things that stick out. One is, I think it's the opening sequence where your guy's off the rocker, and I'm like, man, you're playing that well.
And then the other one,
well, there was no playing there, Ryan. That was reality. It was my 36th birthday, August 3rd, 1976, and I had been drinking all day. And by that night, I'm an alcoholic. I'm since recovered, thank God, for more than 40 years now. But then I was very susceptible, and I was wrestling with those horrible demons that a lot of us who use drugs or alcohol go through, And it was a very bad day, and I did it on film. And I've often said that Francis tried to stop it, and I said, no, let's have it out. Why not?
So that was you really releasing demons.
Oh, I was, yeah. But I was the next day. Of course, I had such a horrible feeling of guilt and remorse, and not to mention a bad hangover. But at the same time, it was not part of the script. It was an improvised scene. That whole sequence was improvised.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, because, see, I replaced a guy. They had already filmed the opening, and then they changed horses midstream, so to speak, and I came in as a replacement. So we didn't want to do the same thing, and we tried to imagine a different opening, and so that was what we did. We sort of said, well, a guy who does he's a special ops guy. He's basically working for the CIA, and he's a career soldier, and he's back in combat for a second tour, or maybe a third one, I'm not sure. But what would he do? So we got a lot of information and said, well, he would act like Kong. He called the Viet Cong Kong. They were big and powerful, They could sit in a tree all day with a pocket full of rice and wait you out, and then catch you in a crossfire, whatever. It was their territory, and so these guys thought of them as Kong. And so we tried to create this character. What would he do waiting for a mission? How would he behave? Well, he would behave like the Viet Cong, He would be small and and self-possessed and mad as a hatter if he's drinking. He'd just gone through a divorce and all of that sort of thing. So we imagined all this stuff and we created it, but it got out of hand for me, not Francis or anyone else, but it was me. And then afterwards, I talked with Francis about it, and we, weren't sure if it would be in the film, if it would be. Then I hoped and prayed. I didn't want anyone to see that. I didn't want to see it. And in fact, I never did until it was in the film. But when the film originally premiered, it was in the Cannes Film Festival in the spring of 1979. He played it at Cannes, and that scene was removed. It was not in there because I was very concerned about it. I didn't go to Cannes, but I wanted to see the reaction. And somebody said, well, they saw it, and they had no memory of a scene of me in a hotel room getting drunk and cutting myself, And so I was so relieved. And then they put it back in when it premiered in the United States. And so when I went to see the film finally with a friend in New York, I was just astonished. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And my friend said, oh, my God, how do you feel about that being? I said, well, that's who I was. That's not who I am. And so I had to leave it go,
What wonderful advice. That's great advice for people. That's who I was, not who I am. Because many times people will attach what they were to their being. That's a good thing to say that. And I'm sorry to bring it up.
No,
I was
all right.
just
No, as I'm saying, it's not who I am,
Yeah.
The other scene was when you came up out of the river and you were camoed out, and I was like, dude, he looks awesome. There's that photo of you, that's a great one. But also, and I never brought it up when we were talking about in Badlands, where you have the rifle over your shoulder and you're standing isolated out in the field. I was like, what a great picture.
Like, what a
well,
great picture.
It's interesting you should call out that one shot because that was sort of what we call a pickup shot. It was not part of the script. I was driving home one night from a distant location in La Junta out on the prairie with Terry Malick. We were just driving along, and we saw this moonrise. And Terry said, oh, quick, Martin, go on out there. And he got into the rear of he went into the trunk and brought out a camera, and the rifle was back there. And he said, go on out there and just get in the frame with that moon. I said, all right, fine. I didn't know what to do. I climbed over a fence, and he did too. And he filmed it. And it was one of those moments that you just, it's in that light and in that time of day and in that direction, and it was just spectacular. But it wasn't in the script, and we weren't sure it would ever be in the movie, but thank heaven it was. It was a gorgeous shot. But it's what we call the James Dean shot. I was with the rifle over my shoulder like Dean in Giant, remember? He looked like the victim with a cross. It was like, okay, this is an homage to James Dean. So that's kind of what it was, yeah.
It looked beautiful to me because I was like, wow, what a picture of Kit, isolated, out in the middle of nature, away from the chaos that he causes. And that was the thing. Yeah, I don't want to keep going back, but there was something about that scene where you guys were living in the jungle, and it was like you weren't even thinking about what had just happened, but yeah, so what a great one. But we'll get away from all the violence for a second, and the madness in the jungle, and talk about something a little more quiet, something that's very personal to you. I remember you telling me this when we were eating, your most personal film. And when I watched it, it's almost like it feels like your soul is on screen, and that's The Way.
Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, that is the most satisfying thing I've ever done in my career, and I'm more proud of that than all the others combined, frankly. The Way was written by my son Emilio and directed by him, and he plays in the film as well. But it is a totally family affair. We raised the money. We filmed it in my father's homeland. It was inspired by him. We dedicated the film to my father, Francisco Estevez, who was born in a little village in northern Spain, not far from Santiago de Compostela, a little village called Tui, which is in northern Spain on the Minho River that separates Spain from Portugal. And we filmed it there in the fall of 2009. And it was a very low-budget, independent film. And it was inspired by a time that I spent in Spain in 2003 with my grandson Taylor Estevez, who is Emilio's son. And he was my assistant at the time all the way through the West Wing, and we had that summer off and we went to Ireland and Spain together, and we drove the Camino in a car, and he met his wife at a place called El Molino, which was one of the refugios along the route to Santiago. And so it became, the Camino and that part of Spain became very important to us. And Emilio started to write a story about two old guys on pilgrimage and this young guy with them who falls in love along the way, but they're totally unaware until it becomes obvious. And it was a comedy. But Emilio thought, well, he felt in a sense that he'd lost a son on the Camino, because once Emilio met Julia, his, present wife, he lived there. So if Emilio wanted to see him, he had to go to Spain. And so he had this sense, I lost my son to the Camino, what's going on there? So he went and he started investigating the Camino, and all of the ramifications that come with it really appealed to him, and he began to form this journey of a father and a son. And it's magnificent. It reminds me in form of the structure of Badlands. It's so unique, and it's so individual, and yet it has such a universal appeal to it, but it's personal. And so I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't seen it yet, because I advise everyone to see it, and to see it with family, because it's what we used to call in the old days a real family film. There's no language that we'd find offensive for sexual behavior, none of that. One guy smokes pot, that's about it. And he's one of the four main guys, but he's kind of a clown, but beautifully so. He's very human and broken and funny, and as we all are. And we come together as a community as we learn each other's shortcomings and realize each other's blessings and spirit. And so, yeah, it's the most satisfying thing I've ever done in my life, and I recommend it highly.
It's beautiful. It really is beautiful. And just a couple questions to talk about it, because you're part of the creation. Was it fun being told what to do by your son as a director?
Well, he more or less told me what not to do. His whole thing was like, don't try to speak any Spanish, because this character does not speak Spanish. And don't be friendly with everyone before you get to know them, because this character doesn't want to be bothered with anybody at the start. It gradually becomes more open and receptive as they go along, and he realizes his own need is for others, as we all come to realize. Community is what we're here for. There's an old phrase. If you ask people, what is the meaning of life? Why are we here? One great meaning that I love is we are here to walk each other home. And that sort of encloses all of it. Be present to one another, go through whatever one's going through together as community. And that's how we heal, and that's how we learn to love ourselves, reflected through other people, and we come to love other people because of our own frailties and shortcomings and brokenness. We see it in everybody,
It makes you kind of want to go walk it.
Yeah, for sure. And it has been a great inspiration for thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, particularly here in the States and Canada, and a lot of English-speaking countries have really taken it to heart. And pilgrims have swelled the Camino since we did the film, and a great many of them, give credit to the film for having inspired them to do it. And there's a website that you can go to. I think it's called thewade.org. I'm not sure, but Emilio set that up, and many people stay in touch with him that have done the Camino with the inspiration of the way. So it's a valuable gift. It's one of those things, we hate to say it, but it's true. It's the gift that keeps on giving,
Yeah. It's really cool too how it was shot, because it felt kind of like a documentary, but not. It doesn't have that documentary tone, but it kind of feels like, because you get to know the people and each one of those supporting characters. I mean, you can see that these are the things of life that we all struggle. Really, honestly, it reminds me a lot of biblical truths. And I know it wasn't a religious show, or like you would call a Christian movie, but it felt, you could feel it in it, because here's the deal with humanity: we are all broken. Every person on that walk was broken. One was looking for change in his life. One was looking or dealing with trauma. One was couldn't discover himself. He didn't know who he was. And it's like, but collectively, and that's the way the church is supposed to be. But the real church, not the ones that we pretend we have, but the real ones, collectively, we come together in our brokenness and we walk through it together. And I was like, wow, it's a beautiful picture of that. Um, and I know that you're a person of faith. How much of that did it reflected the movie for you, or the walk, or because Tom's journey, he slowly awakens from grief to grace. He sees it as he's walking through.
From grief to grace, you're absolutely right. Yeah, he was not a religious man per se. He didn't quite have a handle on what he believed, but he knew that life was a mystery, and it was filled with pain, and with an equal measure of joy if you could find it. And so the journey, he's a doctor, he's an ophthalmologist. And so, as the lady said in the film, you help people to see the world clearer. And he said, well, he never thought of it that way, but that's the truth of it, But in a larger sense, I think it was like a universal journey, and that the journey is not always smooth, and it's not supposed to be. If it's smooth, it's not real life, And I think that what we're all, dealing with nearly all our lives, if we're conscious, is why is there so much pain and suffering, And so often we try to lay it off on God, and then we ask this question so often: why does God allow such pain and suffering and misery in the world? Well, God has nothing to do with all of that, but God is present in it, in that God walks us home. God is always present, and God dies with us as well. God rises and rises and dies with us as we rise and die. God is never separated from us, so that we can't step outside and say, well, how could you let this happen? No, it had nothing to do with it. It happened to him too, or her too, however you look at God. Yeah. It happens to God too. It's like when Elie Wiesel is watching this slaughter of the innocents in Auschwitz, and a fellow inmate says, where is your God now? And he says, on the gallows. God is dying as we watch it, And that's still going on everywhere in the world, wherever innocence dies or is murdered or squashed or crushed, God is the same. And we have to remember, we as Christians believe that God became human and was crushed to death, by a kangaroo court and executed. But then the miracle of miracles, we believe in the resurrection, which we just celebrated recently. Yeah, that's me. That's my take. But I think people can relate to that, whether you're religious or not. And I don't always, I'm a practicing Catholic. I know I'll practice till I try and get it right.
Well, I'll be real. You just shared the gospel, and that was that. Preacher Sheen, how are you doing today?
No, I don't mean
Um,
to preach. How should I say? I don't always talk about religion per se. I'd like to equalize it with spirituality, because religion so often, because of dogma and revealed knowledge, separate us. We're not
yes.
born in the same culture or with the same, upbringing and so forth. And so we have different ideas about religion and different practices of religion, but we're all spiritually motivated. Instinctively, there is a spirituality, a knowingness, as it were, of the mystery, so that we all embrace the mystery. Nobody knows, why we came in here and why we have to leave. you know, at
Yeah.
some given time, that life is, has a perimeter, and we live within it. And nobody gets out of here alive, So
Yeah.
what is this mystery all about? And that's the thing that unites us. And we see it in different cultures and different forms and ways throughout the world, throughout history, how we are all united in our humanity, our spirituality, the mystery of life, which is so fascinating to me in every part of it.
Well, it's like I was reading through scripture, and I remember you shared very briefly about it, and it's okay. I can always edit if you don't want to talk about it. But when I was reading scripture, I was reading about the prodigal son, and I truly believe that is the worst title for that part of the Bible, because those were put in by men, right? It's that story is not about the son; it's about the forgiving father.
And
And about
and
the unforgiving brother.
yeah.
Remember,
But
he never came to himself. His ego would not permit him to embrace the brother that he felt had betrayed not only the father, but him and the
yeah.
culture.
Yeah.
So it's like this. One of my favorite books is by Henry Nouwen, and it is called The Prodigal Son, and he reflects on the painting by the famous Dutch artist Rembrandt, that famous painting of the son coming home and the father blessing him. But in the peripheral of the picture, you see the son, the older brother, looking on without joy or compassion. He's looking on in judgment. And so it's easy for us to identify with the prodigal. How many of us come crawling home,
Yeah.
Anyone can relate to that. For any number of errors we make along the way, we come crawling back for forgiveness and acceptance. And in a loving family and community, we are brought back because we're human. And we're inclined to do stupid things, and so we become the father. That's a little more difficult to forgive, unconditionally and completely. But the one that none of us really want to focus on, and that Henry Nouwen puts the main focus on, is the brother. He never came in for the party. He stood outside. He held his vengeance and judgment. And so he was left outside the picture, outside the light. He's still in the darkness, because of the ego. How could you do this to me? It's judgment. It's how we make the moral judgment on each other,
And Jesus is straight up referring to the Pharisees as the brothers sitting outside, looking in, not wanting to be part. But what the way it's also a picture of how we're supposed to be as the Father in heaven is, and that was with when you were telling me, and here by all means, no judgment at all. But when Charlie was in trouble, you were the one that basically turned him in, but you were also the one that had open arms.
Yeah. I
When he
didn't
came out.
really turn him in. I went with him. I
Yeah.
didn't just turn
Yeah.
him over to authorities. I was there with him.
That's even
Was what
more incredible. Yeah.
You have to go through it with him. You don't just drop him off. You park the car and join him.
That's grace in action, people listening.
Right.
But the thing about Jesus is so clear is that after the resurrection, his first words to the community was, "Peace be with you." He didn't say, "Where were you when I was being arrested? Where were you when they were beating me up? Why didn't you come to my rescue?" None of that. He said, "Peace be with you."
I want to thank you for that, because I remember we were talking and you said something like that, and most people don't realize that it was 1 week before I met Martin. I just resigned from a church, and I was going through a lot of turmoil inside, and I was getting a lot of the treatment you're kind of talking about. Like I was the enemy. And when you said that, I went and I actually wrote a song called Peter. And you think about Peter denied Christ 3 times, and he lied. He didn't protect him. But the first time he sees Jesus, he's on a shoreline making fish. And he tells Peter not exactly what you said. He didn't go up to him and say, "Why'd you deny me? Why'd you do this? What in the world's wrong with you, Peter?" Instead, he looked at Peter and he said, "I love you. Go tend to my sheep. Do you love me? Go tend to my sheep." He didn't accuse him. And a lot of people have this picture of Jesus as this judgmental. He's the most gentle, loving, kindest of all human beings that's ever walked the earth.
And
the most difficult to deal with.
yeah,
Because we don't want to think of Jesus, with the name the nonviolent Jesus, but that's what he was.
Oh yeah, and he is a nonviolent. I believe that. That's what I teach is the nonviolent Jesus, and that's the way our heart should be bent. But I'll get off of that because I've got to fulfill a couple promises here. So The West Wing was my grandparents, hands down, one of their favorite shows. It played in their house all the time growing up. And so it's kind of special for me through them. But man, you brought a humanity to the Oval Office. I mean, he wasn't just a leader. When President Bartlett, you looked at it, he's a husband and a father. He was a man of faith, but of real shaky faith, like the real kind of faith. Like it felt, what parts of him felt closest to you?
Well, it was one of those situations. I came to it kind of backed into it because when I agreed to do the series, first you have to make your deal before you do the pilot, so you don't hold them up. If the pilot's a big success, you're holding all the cards. So you have to make your deal. And so the deal I was asked to make and I accepted was that I would only appear in maybe 4 or 5 episodes over the 22 episode season, including the pilot. And so, I agreed to that. Said, okay, fine. And so the story would not be about the president specifically or the first family. It would be about the staff. And so you'd rarely see the old man, as he was affectionately referred to, except every maybe 4 or 5 episodes, and maybe even less. And so I agreed to that. And the one stipulation I had to agree to was that I would not play another president while the West Wing was on the air, and what are the chances I would get another job playing another president? So I agreed to all of that.
Twice, didn't you?
Yeah.
I did. Bobby, yeah. Didn't you play Bobby as well?
Oh my goodness! All right, yeah, keep going. I'm sorry.
So, then when the network saw the pilot, and I had a sense that this was going to happen as well. They thought, wait a minute, that's the one office that people know is occupied by the president. Who's playing the president? Because remember, I only had one scene in the pilot, and it was at the end of the pilot. Mm-hmm. And so they called me back and said, we're thinking of enlarging the role of the president and including the first family, and would you agree to that? And I said, of course. And the only stipulations that I asked for was that he would be Catholic, because I'm Catholic, and he could have been Protestant or Jewish, didn't matter. I just wanted him to have a faith that he practiced, mm-hmm. and that it was part of his moral compass. I did not want him to work in a vacuum. I wanted the audience to feel that he worked with a higher kind of value in his life, that he had a faith, and he practiced it and believed in it. Okay. And the other thing was, and this is the only 2 things I asked for. The other one was that he had a Notre Dame degree, because growing up I'd always wanted to go to Notre Dame and never did, of course. my dearest friend, who's like a brother to me, did go, and so I live vicariously through Joe Cosgrove, my attorney and dearest friend. Yeah.
That fun episode about where the press secretary says something bad about Notre Dame, and you make her wear the hat the whole episode.
Uh, that one stuck out
Yeah,
to me.
you don't
For some reason.
you don't badmouth Notre Dame, not around
Yeah,
Bartlett. No.
yeah, that's funny. Um, was there a moment like you look around at that cast? Then I don't know, but I mean, Mike, was there a moment where you lean back and go, "This is going to be awesome," or did it kind of just happen, or were you like, "This is a hit"?
Well, there was kind of a measure of both, really, because I knew that we had probably the best written television series ever, and that it was personal and that it was relevant. But also we had a cast, and I was the oldest one in it. I was 59 when I started filming, and the nearest cast member to me in age was John Spencer, God rest him, and I believe John at the time was in his maybe late 40s, so I was a good 10 years older than he. But both of us came from New York. Both of us had stage background. Both of us had 12-step in our background, and so we were kind of like assuming the role of the parents of this group. But that group included some of the best young actors performing in that time and in that place. You know, when you looked at that cast, you know, with those people, they were all in their late 30s, except, you know, Charlie was in his early 20s, but all the rest of them were New York trained stage players. They had careers, but they were not well enough known to have star status yet. That was yet to come for quite a few of them, but they all had this enormous talent. And they were all so bright. They understood that we had something very special. We didn't know if it was going to go, but we knew that if it did, it would be powerful. Remember, you know, we were a democratic, very liberal administration. We were dealing with social justice and mercy and compassion, things that are not always thought of in the political circles. Mm-hmm. And we were also dealing as, you know, very bright, but also very, how shall I say, you know, wounded people. You know, we all had our personal problems, and they always came into the fore, and they reflected, you know, the nation really. You know, that we were not, you know, you could see that they were just ordinary Americans, ordinary people.
Was that during Bush or Clinton?
We started during Clinton. We started we went on the air in the fall of 1999, and we went through to the spring of 2006. So we had 7 seasons, and we went through George Bush's administration, which was Republican, of course, and he was a big fan of the show. We didn't want to admit it, but he was. Yeah. And we were not always a big fan of his, but he was gentlemanly enough to really express his favoritism about the show itself, because it reflected the office and the people that surrounded him. You know?
And it was held with honor. That was the thing too. Like George Bush the younger was very much of a honor, like, you know, like respect the seat, respect the office.
And he was in the military. He'd been in the military too, of course, and his dad was a World War II veteran. So he had that going in. That was a given. Yeah. But you know what he didn't have, I felt, was he did. You know, the Iraqi war, you know, the invasion of Iraq was a huge mistake, and he lied about getting us in there, and that was his Vietnam, if you will. Yeah. That was his. You know, a lot of presidents since Roosevelt felt, you know, if you want to be a great remembered president, you've got to have a war and you got to win it. Mm-hmm. You know, and that took out Lyndon Johnson on Vietnam, and you know, it still proves to be the stumbling block for a lot of powerful people, not just in our country but others as well. You think you can get away with something, and you can take the credit for victory, and it's not. It just, we have to be we have to be cognizant of how willing are you to expand other people's lives to enrich your own. So
Yeah,
that's
war is the worst. War is the worst. There's yeah. So
In
But
that,
we knew this, if I remember. Sorry to go back on it, but we knew we had a great show. We knew we had a great team, writing, producing, the players. What we weren't sure of is, in prime time on a major network, we were NBC, could we sell the products that you need to have to sell in order to have a successful show? Could we sell cars and pharmaceuticals and insurance and who knows what else with this show? And that was the big the question, and the most satisfying response was, yeah, we could sell Kleenex or cars or pharmaceuticals, anything with this message. It's really struck a chord, and so they lined up to sponsor us, and it was very, very gratifying that we could have commercial as well as artistic integrity, and that's very rare, as you know, in our business. And
well, it was a liberal Democrat, party that was in charge, but the show itself, it doesn't matter if you're independent, Republican, or Democrat. It's really a view of what America is.
Exactly,
and that's what was beautiful. It's like, and she's not here today. I was going to have a special guest come on and talk, but she said that she learned English. She's from Persia. She learned English by watching The West Wing and the subtitles. But then she said that she learned her American view from President Bartlett of how you're supposed to be American. And I was like, wow, like what an impact that you guys had. And you probably didn't even know. I mean, I doubt you did, because I hardly knew it. I met her at a gas station, or my friend did, and we talked about it. So I mean, that's just, it's really cool. And you were right about the writing. Here's the thing: when you said that, I made a little note. Was it? Have there ever? Were there that writing is so fast? Like,
okay. he was the head writer. He created the character and the show, and wrote the first 4 years just about every episode. So,
were you ever like, I have to look this up?
No, but I used to debate with him. I'd say that as a polite word. I didn't always agree with his language. The ideas, of course. But the language, I said, well, I wouldn't say it that way. And then I came to learn that, okay, if I say it this way, my way, then I'm me. If I say it his way, then I'm Bartlett. And so I came to embrace his way. It took a while and a suppression of my ego. But, yeah, I realized that he was quite right.
It's incredible. I mean, it's so fast writing, but it's like really good. It keeps you.
So Lawrence O'Donnell, on MSNBC, his show, The Last Word, he was one of the producers and one of the main writers. And he had the most credibility of all the staff, the writers, because of his experience in the Senate, working for, his hero out of New York, the senator. God forgive me, I'm not remembering his name, but Lawrence O'Donnell was like 20 years in the Senate as a staff person, and knew how a bill is, made and presented, and saw how the sausage was made, as it were, and so his credibility came with us. And in one episode, he actually played my father in a flashback scene when Bartlett was a young boy in the private school. His dad was the headmaster, and Lawrence O'Donnell played my father.
Wow, that's so cool. And the part that sticks out to me as a person who loves the arts was the scene in the cathedral where you were mad at God, and I'm like, that's such as a pastor. First off, I've been through that same dilemma, and I've walked people through it. I read this, and I don't know if it's true or not. Was that a completely improvised, like you just did it off the cue, or was it written in the script? Or
it was very specific. In fact, I had to speak Latin through half the speech, and though I was an altar boy when I was a youngster in Ohio growing up, I spoke the Latin back in the 50s. It had been years since I spoke Latin, and so I had to have a refresher course with my pastor here in Malibu, at Our Lady of Malibu, God rest him, John Sheridan, who was old enough to remember the Latin from the Old Mass before Vatican II. And so he helped me with that. But yeah, and I once asked Aaron, why did you use Latin in that scene? He said, because I thought it would be the language of God, that would be a universal language you could speak to God with. It was for the Catholic Church, and before Vatican II. But I said, okay, and so I surrendered to it. And I thought it was a very imaginative thing to do right out of the blue. But we got permission to film it in the National Cathedral, and that was, a little touchy because they gave us permission, but they weren't necessarily supportive. The good people that were with us that day to make sure we did things right, and they did appear on camera as the canon and so forth, for the ceremony. It was a funeral we were there for. And so I remember that when I did the thing, and when I stomped on the cigarette, I smoked in the cathedral and stomped on the cigarette as part of the scene, they were very, very concerned about that, and they looked askance, and I remember as we were filming the coverage of the scene, I just was wandering around, and I saw some of the people from the cathedral, sitting there very quiet and kind of, they had these very disapproving attitudes, and I said, you don't think this is a good idea? Well, we had nothing to do with that choice, we don't approve, of course not. I said, well, I don't blame you. I said, but you know what this is about? And just at that moment, I looked up as if I'm trying to catch a thought, and I saw a stained glass window with an image of Job. And I said, you see that up there? That's Job. And through all the troubles and all of the tribulations of his life, he never gave up his faith, but he didn't let God off the hook. And like Tevye, he's saying, how could you do this to me? On the other hand, I appreciate everything else you do, So that's kind of what I was doing, He was raging, how could you let this happen? On the other hand, you're really, giving me a few good days, and I appreciate that. But I'm not going to let you off the hook kind of thing. And so it was a very kind of deeply personal, kind of emotional, spiritual rage that, we talked earlier about how we blame God so often. But come on, God dies with us, God rises with us, God lives with us and walks us home, So, that.
Well, you're just killed by podcast here right now. I want you to know, well, because everybody expects me to come out with all the spiritual pastor stuff, and you're doing
for me.
Oh, sorry about
that.
No, you're great. I love it. So on I'm not going to keep you here forever. I promise. I could talk to you for 3 hours, so I'm not going to do that.
That's extra.
Yeah. You're going to charge me for that. I do think Gettysburg, so this is for all the kids at OBA. This is Oklahoma Bible Academy. It's where my son goes to school. I had to tell them, you guys all know who Martin Sheen is. Why? Because you watch him in class while you watch Gettysburg. And then when I told them what you played, they were like, "Oh, that's Martin Sheen." Yeah, okay, that's him. So it's crazy to me. You know why? It's a generational thing, because you are an iconic legend when it comes to cinema. It's just these younger kids, they just don't get it. So this is for them. You were in Gettysburg. You did a great job. It was really long. That's why they take a whole week in school to watch it. I remember you telling me about watching a premiere and someone was there and you wanted to say something and then you realized something. I'll let you share that if you remember what I'm talking about.
Yeah, there were two things. When I did a brief publicity tour for the film, I believe we opened it in 1992. God, I hate to say that. It's so long ago. I feel like I'm 92. But so I went to New York and did some publicity, and then we opened the film in Washington, D.C. at a theater there. And I remember coming out of the theater, and there were two old guys behind me who were saying they didn't know it was me in front of them, but one of them said to the other, well, I guess it's a pretty good film, but I think it's longer than the battle,
Yeah.
And then I went down to Georgia for a premiere there, and it was a very large house, and I was late. And so I struggled across the middle aisle to find my seat, and people shushing me and telling me, sit down there, fine. So I sat down, and the film was about halfway through the first act. And there was a guy a couple of rows behind us who kept telling those around him what was going on and what was the result of what was. He'd say, oh, now there's Longstreet. See, he did this and he did that, and y'all going to see this and that and so forth. And he went on, and I thought, oh, man, this guy is spoiling the film. I knew there was an intermission coming, and I resolved to, let him know a piece of my mind about spoiling the film for those around him. And the intermission came, the lights came up, I turned around and I said, oh, pleasure to be here with you, Mr. President. It was Jimmy Carter.
That's so funny.
Now, no president, with the possible exception of Eisenhower, who actually lived on the battlefield, his farm was there, still is. It's a historical site now, and I was just there recently. But and very graciously given a tour by Susan Eisenhower, his granddaughter, who was so extraordinary. I just attended the Gettysburg Film Festival, which was celebrating the 80-year anniversary of the end of World War II in Europe, which I was just there. At any rate, Jimmy Carter was at Camp David with Anwar Sadat from Egypt and Menachem Begum from Israel, and he was trying to work out a peace plan. And it wasn't going well, and the two of them weren't even talking to each other, that is, Sadat and Begum, and they were wanting to go home. And Jimmy Carter, on a last-second inspirational thought, said, let's go take a journey here. And, Camp David is very close to Gettysburg. In fact, it's just over the hill, basically, a few miles as a crow flies. And so he took Sadat and Begum to Gettysburg, and he walked them around that magnificently cared-for sacred ground where all that humanity was offered up. There were 54,000 young, able-bodied men who destroyed each other, and their remains are still there, and many, many thousands more who were wounded and carried away. It was the deadliest battle, I believe, in the Civil War, and the most decisive, because Lee began to realize he couldn't extend the army any further than he did, and that was a great loss for him. And slowly and gradually, that was in early July of '63. The war ended just about 2 years later. So, at any rate, Jimmy Carter took these two world leaders who were avowed enemies in the Mideast, and he got them to agree to a cessation of hostilities and to a workable peace plan, which in large part is still in effect. It's hard to see that now, what's going on in the West Bank and Gaza. But it is true that Jimmy Carter had a profound effect. And Gettysburg played into it, because he said to these two world leaders, look, if the only thing you can think of is destroying each other, this is what you have left for your grandchildren. Look at this field. 53 to 54,000 able-bodied young men slaughtered each other within eyes' view. And this is what legacy is left. And we've had our Civil War already, and we're able to live with our differences with each other. And Gettysburg was a large part of that. And he got them to forge a peace agreement based almost solely alone on his personal vision of what a leader does. It's not about succeeding on the battlefield, although that's part of it. If you're in battle, it was about succeeding in the minds and hearts of people. And you had to take it personal. If it's not personal, it's impersonal. If it's impersonal, people really don't give a damn.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
I'm going to do a real quick rapid fire. Okay. I'm going to say one word, and you tell me the first thing that comes to your mind.
Oh, no. Okay. All right. I'll take my time, though.
Kit.
Oh, Terrence Malick.
Captain Willard.
Oh, shit. Marlon Brando.
Tom.
Emilio.
President Bartlett.
Oh, God. Just a group of people that I'm still very close to and that were celebrated in a recent book called What's Next by Melissa Fitzgerald and her colleague who were on the West Wing for all those years and wrote this book about the show and everybody in it and everything about it called What's Next. And it was just published recently, and it's doing very well. So I think of what's next, and I use that phrase a lot, you know. Yeah. So I'll say that to you.
What about Emilio?
Firstborn.
Charlie.
Oh, Charlie. In a phrase, he would be honest when caught.
That sounds like me. Renee.
Oh, hang on. Janet is just saying to me the name I forgot, the co-author of the book about the West Wing called What's Next is Mary McCormick. Mary McCormick was the CIA advisor, and Melissa Fitzgerald was the press secretary's assistant.
What about Renee?
Renee. Patience.
Mm-hmm. Ramon.
Ramon. Individual.
Janet.
Jeez. Just about everything.
Everything. What about Pastor Ryan?
Well, my new friend. And you didn't mention a word about when I was bragging about your combat stage skills, and I don't think people realize how absolutely brilliant you were in that production of Romeo and Juliet. So
I try not to talk about myself. You did the most
famous fight of all. You did the one with rapier and dagger. Yes, it said both hands are armed, and so the movements you can't, you got nothing to hold on to or fall down to and break your fall. You've got weapons in both hands, and so that was the most extraordinary thing about.
And you got to see it. So
yeah,
that was
you
cool.
did. You showed it to me.
It's very, and most people don't know is I still have a scar on my finger today from that fight. I got hit with the hilt of that thing. I broke my finger. But you don't see it actually happens in that video you saw, but you don't notice it because I just gritted my teeth.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
And do you still practice with the rapier or sword or dagger, or do you still?
No, but I think
I could if I picked it up, I could do it probably in a week. Like I could get it all back. It's all muscle memory, really. It's like riding a bike for me.
Yeah. Does anyone in your congregation or your family know that you have this skill? And
family knows, but I try to keep this stuff kind of under wraps. Then I gotta. So
the one question I wanted to ask you after witnessing that was, did you ever consider competing in fencing on the Olympic level?
Oh no, I would get destroyed by a real fighter.
I would doubt that. Watching that video of you in that combat scene was extraordinary. I'd never seen that intricate and that skill and that dangerous looking fight in a stage play ever in my life. And I don't know if I ever want to see it again because it's so terrifying. But you were magnificent, and I needed to tell you.
I may share it but I may not. So I might edit that out. But but I may share it. What about I got one more name that's a big name that I really first word that comes to mind. Martin Sheen.
Oh, I'm laughing. That's all I can do. I don't have a clue. I would just say mystery.
Mystery. Well, I'm gonna close with something. I'll give you the final word, okay? But I want to tell you thank you so much. When we met it was at probably the lowest point of my life. And just throughout that week, our conversations, many that you guys have heard here, just the wisdom that he shared, I truly forgot you were an actor. That's what was so impressive. Like, you made me feel so comfortable. I forgot that you were there shooting a movie. Um, and the comfort level, the kindness you shared to my son and my wife, and the kind words you said on the closing night when you left. The When you leaned forward and you grabbed my wife's hand, and I don't know if you remember saying this, but you said, "Whatever he does, he's still a keeper," or something like that.
Okay, that sounds like me. Yeah.
And that went a long ways. And there's a moment that I will never forget, and it was when we were on the corner in Enid, and you were like, "Have you ever heard this hymn?" And I was like, "No, I'm not familiar with that hymn." And you were like, "It's an old Shaker hymn," and you taught it to me, and we sang it on the corner. And just so you know, the production team said they remembered that really stuck out to them. Me and you standing on that corner, because they were all holding for us.
Oh, they were? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I remember. Yeah, it's my favorite hymn. Yeah, it's my favorite hymn. And it was the only time that I sang publicly, was that hymn on the Prairie Home Companion, many years ago, because I was singing it in my dressing room before the show, and Garrison Keeler heard me and said, "What is that hymn? What are you singing?" I said, "Well, that's my favorite." "Well, we're going to do that on the air." "No, we're not." I said, "Yes, we are." And he got me to sing it on the air. So I sang it with you. I think that's the second time publicly I've ever sung. You want to sing it now?
Yeah, would you mind?
You remember it?
Yeah. Well, I don't remember it, but I remember you singing it, and I loved it.
Okay, if you sing it with me.
Oh, okay.
Let's close the show. Yeah, it's easy enough.
What was the name?
How Can I Keep From Singing?
Oh, that's right. How Can I Keep
From Singing? An old Shaker hymn, and it's always done a cappella because they didn't use musical instruments. So here we go. 3, 2, 1. My life goes on in endless song above earth's lamentation. I hear the real, though far off hymn that hails a new creation. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging. For love is Lord of heaven and earth. How can I keep from singing? Amen.
Wow. So awesome.
Hey, Ryan, it's been great talking to you and singing with you, and I look forward to doing it again.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. All right.
Kindly remember me to your beautiful family.
Oh, I will. Definitely.
All right, kiddo. God bless. Bye-bye now.